Well, hello and welcome. I wanted to start by thanking each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. We wanted to connect with you all and put the session together because we wanted to, one, share the impact of University Press Library and the potential for your faculty and your students, but also in addition, just really wanted to connect with you all. Wanted to really put a face to the schools we're reaching out to, but also let you know who the person behind the emails are. So hi, welcome again. I'm Elizabeth Riojas, and I am an account manager here at Gruyter's. I'm the account manager for the Oberlin schools. My territories cover part of the West Coast, Midwest, and South. So if your libraries fall in those areas, I am that faceless person that's been reaching out to you. Just a few housekeeping notes. We love questions and engagement, but if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. We are recording, and if you're not comfortable on camera, that is perfectly fine. Regarding questions, please drop them in the chat or feel free to unmute and speak up. I will also be monitoring the chat. And if you're feeling a bit shy and would like to send your questions directly to me, I'd be happy to receive them. If we aren't able to answer them during the session, no worries, we will reach out directly to you with a response afterwards. Well, without further ado, I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the agenda for today and of our speakers. So we're going to start with Dave Celano, who's our Director of Sales. He's been with DG for a number of years, I won't say how long, and he's been absolutely instrumental in setting up the University Press Library and the creation of the Oberlin model. We also have Aaron Sandoval here, who is the librarian with oh my God, why am I now? Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I just completely blanked on this. I apologize.
Wesleyan University.
Thank you, Wesleyan University, as it's written across my page repeatedly. Wesleyan University. And Wesleyan University was a pioneer in joining us at the University Press Library, joined us in the pilot, so has been with University Press Library for a number of years, and we're really excited to have Aaron here. Next, we also have Whitney Jordan, who will be discussing data analysis and usage within the Oberlin Group. And then we also have Derek Wright, who is my counterpart and as an account manager and handles the territories of the Northeast and the Southwest. And throughout all of this, again, if you have any questions, you can save them for the end or sprinkle it throughout. We're just really happy to have you all here. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass this on to Dave.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, everyone, for participating. We very much appreciate it. I won't take up too much of your time, but what I wanted to do before we hear from Aaron as well as Whitney, I'd like to just give a quick overview of what University Press Library is. University Press Library is certainly a model. It's a model, as you could see on this slide right here, where a library is able to acquire complete copyright year collections from prestigious university presses, all of the content in unlimited user format with no DRM as a one-time purchase and low cost per title. University Press Library is, of course, a model, as I'd mentioned. It's not trying to be a model that does all things for everyone, but certainly a model that we found has had a tremendous amount of impact, not only for our library partners, but for our university press partners. University Press Library, again, is complete copyright year, so it's not a single title model. It's not an approval plan. It's also not incomplete, and it's not an embargoed model. University Press Library is, in addition to the actual thing that libraries and their patrons access, it's a community. It's a community of libraries and presses and folks at the Gruyter who came together to solve numerous challenges in the ecosystem that all of these players interact in. Just to latch on to one of the points here to provide a little bit of an illustration, on the next slide, you'll see how the University Press Library compares with some other university press partners where their content is also hosted. So in terms of completeness, you'll see De Gruyter here represented by the green bars, something that is certainly quite comprehensive versus content from these presses that is hosted elsewhere. As I noted, this is a model that was born out of a community of libraries and presses coming together, and it is geared toward addressing many challenges in a quite messy landscape, a landscape where there are many players, not only in terms of presses and libraries that acquire and utilize their content, but also folks in the middle who might host that content and different models of how that content is actually sold, acquired, and accessed. So when considering all of these challenges in this messy landscape, the presses and libraries and De Gruyter that were initially involved at the onset of University Press Library came together as a community to simplify things and develop what's now known as the University Press Library. University Press Library consists of around, I believe it's 24 prestigious university presses. Actually, if you were to go back in time about 5 or 6 years ago, there'd only be 3 presses on this slide: Harvard, Columbia, and Princeton University Press. Aaron from Wesleyan, who's on this call here, will be presenting in just a few minutes. He was one of the original University Press Library pilot participants who came on board and helped to develop the model. And this model is certainly changed over time to not only include prestigious Ivy League university presses, but also, as you can see on this slide here, other very prestigious presses from the Americas as well as Europe, such as the University of Chicago Press and Edinburgh University Press. So really quite an impressive community of university presses that have joined us. So when this University Press Library was a pilot about 5-6 years ago, we certainly had smaller institutions, non-ARL institutions on board, folks from Oberlin Libraries such as yours that participated, such as Wesleyan, such as Colby Bates and Bowdoin. But the fact of the matter was that those libraries, worked together to come on board, and there wasn't a model as recently as 3 or 4 years ago that would allow individual institutions, Oberlin institutions, to come on board in a way that was affordable to them, that offered them the type of benefits that they saw as beneficial to the studies, the research, et cetera, at their institutions. But there certainly remained a need. After all, we're talking about leading liberal arts colleges and leading university presses. There's certainly a strong connection between the two parties right there. This is content that's central to the teaching at these institutions. And in terms of staff time, the ability to navigate this landscape, we had been told by numerous libraries within the Oberlin Group, that Oberlin Group of Libraries, that it was desired. They liked the simplicity of it. They liked the liberalness of the model, especially when it came, for example, to liberal interlibrary loan and other reasons, of course. But the problem was that we only had really just one model that was geared toward ARLs or groups of Oberlin libraries that could come on board together. So we had to do a little bit of work. And with help of numerous Oberlin libraries, we created a new model, which we'll talk about just a little bit later on after Aaron's and Whitney's presentation. And Elizabeth, just the next slide. And since we developed that model, we've seen an increase in the number of Oberlin participants. In 2022, 18 libraries are now on board. And of course, growing in terms of number of libraries that have committed. This is a listing right here for your curiosity as to who is currently on board. But we certainly think that this is a model that is quite impactful. And that's one of the major reasons why we're here today, to talk about the impact of the University Press Library for the presses that we have on board, for the libraries that are a part of this program. We sure hope that the detail that we'll provide here will certainly be of interest. But as Elizabeth had just mentioned just a few minutes back, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. And if you don't, we hope that you enjoy what Aaron and Whitney and the rest of us do have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. If there's no questions in the chat, then I will pass it on to Aaron Sandoval, who is the Collection Development and Acquisitions Librarian at Wesleyan University, and again, was one of the first libraries to join us in the pilot program for University Press Library. So we're really excited to have his perspective and just a discussion on the impact. Aaron, if you don't mind taking it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I have been at Wesleyan for about 10 years. I do collection development and acquisitions there. Just really briefly, Wesleyan is just over 3,000 FTE, and we're almost all undergraduate except for some graduate programs in the sciences. As Dave was mentioning, we have been, we joined in the pilot of the University Press Library way back in like 2015. And at the time we were very interested in it. We only had one major ebook set that we were buying at the time, and that was Springer, that we had purchased for several years. And we were interested to expand our ebook buying. And this pilot was of just very high interest because of the presses involved. We have always purchased high numbers of Harvard and Princeton and Columbia. So at the time, we were able to join the pilot as part of our very small consortium with Connecticut College and Trinity College. Besides just the quality of the presses, we are interested in it because it was DRM free, and that was becoming increasingly important to us, as well as the comprehensiveness of the titles in the package. We were really used to eBook Central and other types of packages that large numbers of titles in any publisher output were simply not available. And so the idea of having a more comprehensive package was very attractive. At the time, we were also really interested in being able to share. We were trying to share purchasing as a consortium, and we were able to buy it together. That was really great. I would say that there were, in the early years, there were a few issues that we encountered with the pilot. The metadata between the publishers and Gruyter, and then later on to various knowledge bases, was not as smooth as we would like at the time. And at the time, there was a different platform. Gruyter had a slightly different platform, not as robust as today. And that was also another issue. And I think maybe the main issue for us and for our consortial partners was just a change in perspective of how we were looking at the purchasing of ebook sets. We were used to Springer, and that was a very big package, but these were a smaller number of titles. And I think we were really looking at the usage and the package as something like Academic Complete, or as even just a journal package. And we were expecting to see usage based on that kind of model, rather than as a set of publisher titles in any given year. And I think that usage was disappointing to us at first, particularly for our partner libraries. So Connecticut and Trinity ended up not continuing with the pilot after a couple of years. After a lot of thought, Wesleyan did continue, and I'm happy to say that a lot of the initial problems were ironed out. The metadata is much better now and much smoother, and the platform had a major upgrade. So those were big issues. And I think as Wesleyan became more familiar with and got more comfortable with other types of ebook sets and obtaining more of its content, more of its monographic content in digital format, our understanding of the value of the University Press library just went up and up. So we ended up acquiring and purchasing MIT and Duke ebook sets as well. And we tried out EBAs with Oxford and Cambridge, as well as some more I guess less core material, such as Rutledge, Taylor and Francis, and Brill. So, but as we thought about it, and as we looked at what we were still buying in print, we were really interested in expanding the University Press, our content. So the last couple of years, we added presses each year. We started adding University of California, which was very big for us, as well as University of Chicago. And those were two big ones. And we also did Hawaii. And more, we see the University Press as really the core of our monographic collection, which is now we collect in digital format as the default, and we see it as the core of the core. And we are now all in. We buy all of the publishers with Gruyter. The fact that it is DRM free is absolutely huge. We kind of made a commitment to focusing on DRM free content. The fact that it's comprehensive is really huge. And the fact that the prices have become more reasonable for a single library to purchase, and a library of an Oberlin library or library of our size is really huge. I think I would say the other thing about the University Press library, at least in our institution, is that it has been, as you can imagine, uniformly popular with faculty. It's very, very nice to be able to let faculty know that we're purchasing the entire output of these key presses. Because these are the major American university presses. It is faculty and librarians tend to regard them as really the central core of our monographic purchasing. We also do, besides EBAs, we also do JSTOR DDA. And that was something that Dave mentioned, that is an alternate way of getting some of this content. We do that. We found that it was more cost effective to purchase the whole sets rather than trying to do title by title. And that once you started adding up the costs, that it was better to buy the comprehensive set rather than the higher priced individual titles. I think that has really been our experience. I would say that many of the issues that we had previously, again, have been ironed out. I think it is important to know from a librarian's perspective that because it is De Gruyter is a third-party platform, that the release of the titles is not quite as quick as a publisher platform such as Cambridge or Oxford, in which they could put their own titles on the platform very quickly. So there's a little bit of a delay there, but other than that, I think all of the issues that we previously had have been settled, and that we are committed to the University Press platform going forward as part of our collection development. I'm happy to take questions, but that's our experience with the University Press Library.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Are there any questions for Aaron? Oh, here is a question. Teresa, thank you. This to you, Aaron. Do you have a de-duping process so you can avoid purchasing duplicate titles through other means such as DDA that will show up in the UP collection as the titles are published? Yeah,
the only one platform that we had to worry about that was JSTOR DDA, and we just let JSTOR know to block those titles. We block them only in JSTOR DDA. We also do JSTOR EBA, which is a much bigger pool of titles, and some of those we don't have all of the back files through De Gruyter yet, and so we do want access to those. So JSTOR is able to allow us access to the EBA stuff, but not the DDA.
Thank you so much, Aaron. There's another question, this one from Kevin. Aaron, what kind of promotion have you done over the years with your faculty and students for the De Gruyter UPL?
Yeah, that's a really fabulous question, and one that we're trying to work on, especially now that we are buying more of the total output in the University Press Library. And mostly it has been word of mouth from me and from all of our liaison librarians, just letting faculty in particular know. We do display a lot of print books in our on the first floor of our library, and we don't display a lot of Harvard or Princeton or Hawaii or so forth. And so we were in the process of developing some signage just to alert students to the increasing number of monographs that are available in digital format. It's not only a university press, it's Oxford and Cambridge and others as well. So we're trying to do that. We're also trying to do, we need to put in place a kind of a digital rota, rota for digital ebooks in our LibGuide, just to alert people to new books. We're in the process of doing that as well.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other questions? Oh, okay.
Aaron, I have a question, if you don't mind. You'd mentioned that Wesleyan, started out with the 3 pilot presses, and then cut back, but then came back on board and are now all in. When I showed the university presses on one of my earlier slides, there certainly are the upper crust or top university presses such as Harvard and Chicago, etc. But we also have some really interesting and quite good geographically significant presses, such as like the University of Hawaii Press, for example, University of Texas Press. When considering presses to add, does it go beyond your end? Does it go beyond, just what you've historically supported or prestige? What goes into the selection of what press that Wesleyan, the presses that Wesleyan decided to go with?
It's a really great question. And we about the same time that we went in with the pilot program of University Press Library, we also developed a shared print approval plan with Connecticut and Trinity. And basically, all of the presses that we now get through to Gruyter were in the print approval plan. So they were already kind of our key presses that we tended to select from and that we are interested in. And certainly those two that you mentioned, like Hawaii and Texas, and some of them are just for their geographic focus, they were important to us. So we were buying almost all of Hawaii's press titles anyway. They were just very strong in Asian studies and so forth. So it was really fairly easy to expand because all of those presses were already the key ones that we were interested in, just historically that we purchased.
Thanks, Aaron. Looks like there's one more question here from Laura Volger. Is whole ebook lending allowed with the titles you have purchased? I responded yes, and I wasn't sure if this went to everyone, but to answer that question, Laura, the answer is yes. And what we ask from our end, or essentially what we put in licenses, is so long as international copyright law is observed, and so long as the library isn't looking to make money off of the sale of the content to another library, and so long as you have the ability to participate in such electronic interlibrary loan, then that is certainly one of the aspects of the University Press Library program.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, and thank you so much, Aaron, for both your insight as well as just your answers to these really great questions. If there's no more questions in the chat, and of course, feel free to continue to drop them in. We'll also have a Q&A at the end if you weren't able to ask. Then I will thank Aaron again for his time, and I will send over to Whitney. Whitney Jordan is our library liaison, and in a past life was a e-collections and acquisitions librarian. We are so thankful for her expertise, and she's been kind enough to share data and uses specifically within the Oberlin Group. You're in for a real treat. Thank you so much, Whitney.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. I want to thank you again for having us today. And like Elizabeth mentioned, I'm going to talk about usage for Oberlin institutions and some of the trends and aspects of the data I got to look at that I thought were interesting. So we'll start by looking at usage for Oberlin institutions that are currently acquiring the University Press Library collections. We'll look at it pretty broadly. And then focus on a smaller selection of those institutions that have overlapping collections to see how they perform over time. And then the last thing we'll look at are the top acquired presses for the Oberlin Group. So this is actually a pretty interesting data set in that there's a lot of approaches that could be taken to review and analyze it. There's also a lot to consider with what we're looking at. My goal for this is to demonstrate how the usage is growing among the Oberlin institutions, but I do want to recognize that it's not perfect, and I've made attempts to adjust and normalize this as much as possible so that you're getting a pretty accurate picture, like accounting for the number of institutions or the number of collections that are represented. And while I think it's a pretty good picture, again, it's not perfect. But So in the following slides, what we'll see, the majority of usage we'll look at is from counter 5 from January 2021 to January 2023, unless it's otherwise noted. I used the TRB1 report and looked at unique title requests as the metric. And lastly, there are just a few spikes throughout the data that we'll see. Some of it is due to increasing numbers of participating institutions, which I've tried to note where that's relevant. But some of it does appear to actually be increased patron discovery in need. So I know this isn't the first, and it's probably not going to be the last time that you hear this today, but the program, especially among Oberlin institutions, is growing. This chart looks at usage over a 25-month period. And while it's not surprising that usage is going to increase, especially as more institutions join, what I do find interesting is that we see that overall increase. We see the normal peak that we would expect in the fall, but then that overall increase trending into January. The number of institutions that are participating, as well as the number of collections, have been pretty stable since July 2022. And it looks like usage is off to an even stronger start in the new year, which is, I think, pretty exciting and intriguing. So next, we'll narrow the scope of this overall usage and focus on just 2022 and January of 2023 by copyright year, specifically for copyright years 2020, 2021, and 2022. These 3 copyright years accounted for a little over 50% of usage in calendar year 2022. So this first graph shows just 2020 and 2021. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm saying those years repeatedly. So technically all 18 institutions are represented here, and there's nothing filtered out. But I have made notes about how many institutions have actually acquired content or those copyright year collections to help frame that picture a little bit better. So for both of these copyright years, we do see those expected peaks and valleys throughout the academic year and the peaks in the semesters. And while 2020 isn't quite as strong as copyright year 21, and there's a little bit of variance in those institutions, the point I wanted to make with this is that usage is still pretty strong for this current content, which at least I think is notable considering that the content that's primarily published with these presses is in the humanities and social sciences. So then as we add in copyright year 2022, which is represented by this blue line, this does actually account for all 18 institutions. And we see that as this a steady increase or a steady overall increase, this total usage doesn't surpass the previous copyright year collection, but we do see that steady rise throughout the year as this content is becoming available and being more discoverable. So next, I wanted to highlight some of the overall trends from the University Press Library program among Oberlin libraries. It's not surprising that usage on the platform will increase by a fair amount for institutions who start purchasing collections. Prior to purchasing or acquiring these collections, there's likely only going to be a very limited amount of content that's available on the Gruyter platform through the library. And then all of a sudden there's a slight influx in that. So for the 6 institutions who did begin purchasing or acquiring collections in 2022, we saw an overall usage increase of 350%. Then for the 12 institutions who were acquiring these collections prior to 2022, there was still an overall increase, which I thought was interesting, and that was by about 104%. While some of this could be due to expanding the collections that they're acquiring or filling in those gaps, I do really believe that a part of this is also due to that increased discovery and demand by the campus communities. Next, I tried to look at average use per collection. So in 2021, there was an average of 232 uses per collections. And this is among 70 collections that are spread among the participating libraries. In 2022, this average does go down to 214 uses per collection. However, that's a little bit misleading because the number of collections almost doubles in that time to 132. So there's a much larger amount of content for this or this average number of uses to be spread around. So now we'll look at collection usage over time. And for this set, I selected a few schools who have been purchasing collections from the same presses over a period of time. This usage is limited to the institutions throughout the reporting period. So only those selected institutions. And it's also limited so that it only represents the collections and by copyright year that they have in common. The only change to this data set is the front list that gets added annually for each institution. So first we'll look at usage from 2018 to 2020. The report used for this was Counter 4 BR2 successful section requests. So what we see here is a steady increase over this 3-year period with a more dramatic increase in 2020, which could be expected with the pandemic taking place during that time. So now we'll look at usage from 2020 to 2022. And for this, we're going back to Counter 5, TRB1, and the unique title requests. You'll notice that 2020 is represented here as well. And this is because this was a transition year for us. So since these institutions were purchasing prior to 2020, I was able to include it in both reports. So if we take 2020 as a base from the previous Counter 4 report, we can see that usage has continued to grow from that dramatic increase in from 2019 to 2020. It's a little bit more gradual and not as steep, but it's still increasing. And then we get another fairly dramatic increase from 21 to 22, which without speaking to those institutions, I can't say too much more. I can't give too much of a background for why that could be. But in looking at this, I was hoping to show how these collections perform and continue to perform over time. So the last thing we'll look at is the top 5 presses that are acquired by Oberlin members. And they are Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, and NYU and Fordham. And technically this is 6 presses, but we group NYU and Fordham together, so they are both represented here. So this first slide, we'll look at the average use for each press per institution. So this is the number of unique title requests divided by the number of institutions that are purchasing these collections. For each of these presses, usage was limited to only the institutions that were acquiring the collection, so as not to inflate these numbers with single title purchases or anything outside of the collections. So Harvard and Columbia both have 15 institutions who acquire their content. And then NYU, Fordham, Princeton, and Stanford all have 10, which we'll talk about why that is relevant a little bit later with Derek. So this last slide looks at the percentage of usage each of these presses account for overall for calendar year 2022. These presses accounted for about 56% of the total usage among these 18 Oberlin schools, which was an increase of almost 10% from 2021. These are not necessarily the highest used presses among the group, but they are the most acquired, and you can see that they're still accounting for a substantial portion of the overall use. I know this has been a lot of data, and I appreciate you hanging with me in a very short period, but so I know these statistics represent Oberlin institutions acquiring this university press library as a whole rather than individually. And I hope that this provided some insight into the value of these collections and what they can add to your existing collections. If you have any questions about anything we discussed, I'm happy to talk with you more in depth, or you can get in touch with Derek and Elizabeth as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Whitney. We really appreciate it. Are there any questions before we transition to the next speaker?
Yes, hi, Steve Allen here. I had a question for Whitney. Whitney, you've also have done usage for much larger libraries over the course of your assessment for the Oberlin schools. What was your opinion on the results compared to what you see with non-Oberlin universities and colleges?
So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just namely the larger ones, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I think I was most surprised, so I looked at usage on the entire platform. And one of the things I saw was how much demand this recent current year content, how much demand there is for it, which is surprising because I had, especially from my time in libraries, I had this assumption that all humanities and social sciences content, like, it's not going to really start hitting its stride and getting its use until about after it's been in the collection for 3 years or so. And I expected, when I looked at usage on the whole platform, what I saw was how much demand there was almost immediately. And maybe that's partly to do with the shift to online, which is entirely possible, but I guess I still expected that trend to hold. And then especially going to smaller institutions and a smaller data set, I expected to see maybe that there's not going to be a lot of use until, after it's been there for about 3 years. So we're seeing more maybe of, 2018 or pre-2018 content. That's where the majority of use is. So I think one of the biggest surprises for me was continuing to see how much the current content is in demand, especially as it's released. Maybe that's more surprising rather than a trend, but it seems like that trend that we saw very, very broadly is holding, which I found fascinating. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
It's a bit of a ramble on my part.
Whitney, Derek will be talking just a little bit about the model in just a minute here, and part of the model is access to what we refer to as backfile years, so 2013 through 2000 for certain collections, depending on the Oberlin Library participation, as well as archive, which are pre-2000 collections. Did you on your end, when you went through the data, were there any interesting observations when it came to usage from those years of content, or did you spend too much time on that end?
I did not spend as much time as I probably should have looking at that. I mean, the majority of usage that I saw did seem to be more recent content, but I would have to follow up with you maybe on some percentages for that backfile portion. I mean, that's where it gets a little bit more spread out, right? So there was still, from what I remember, there was still use there, but it did seem like the vast majority was more of that current, which is surprising, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Perhaps for a sequel to this session.
Well, thank you all so much for your questions. And thank you so much, Whitney, for sharing such data-rich information. I really appreciate it. Now we'll transition to Derek Wright, who is my counterpart as an account manager and handles, like I said before, the Northeast and Southwest and for the Oberlin schools. So I'll go ahead and pass that on to Derek.
All right, thank you all. Thank you, Whitney. I hope I didn't lose you all with all the data and numbers that we just went through, but just wanted to kind of outline the actual Oberlin model and a little bit of the history of how we got here. So in developing the model, as we've discussed, we have actively used our early library partners to sort of flush out and find the best model for the Oberlin Group. So we started with Colby Bates and Bowden. They came to us, real excited about the pilot, really excited about the content. As Aaron described, the pricing of it, there was basically one model for all schools. They were getting pretty much the same pricing as a larger ARL school. And they came to the conclusion that if they were able to purchase the content together, that price point would sort of work for them. So that's how we started with them. And then we attempted to replicate that across the group. We quickly realized that coordinating schools to purchase at the same time and the same content in these nice little groups of 3 was very difficult. It was, not every institution has the same needs or wants or budget at the same time. So what we decided to do is to extend that same buying power to the entire group by providing a 66% discount on all of our already discounted collections. So basically you will have the buying power as if you were purchasing with 2 other libraries. That was kind of the loose calculation that we came up with to sort of give you that same buying power and accessibility as a larger ARL would have. So moving into that, that was the pricing end of it, but also the accessibility part was really number 1 for us. We understand, the prestigious content that's out there and the prestigious research being done at these Oberlin libraries. So we wanted to make as much content available as possible. So that's where we developed the second half of the model. Next slide. We've already seen this slide, but yeah, just wanted to notate again how as much as the purchasing libraries are increasing, the number of collections purchased is increasing exponentially. So not only are we getting new members a part of the group, but the current members are purchasing more collections and adding sort of in the way that Aaron described. So here's the accessibility part. We wanted more content to be available to the Oberlin Library. So what we are offering is that when you purchase any current front list from any specific press, you will get gratis access for free to the back file. That's what we consider 2000 to 2013. So you will get that automatically for free, and you will maintain that access as long as you continue to purchase the current front list for that current year. So 23 now and then 24 and so on. But one of the aspects of the group, which is unique and exclusive to the Oberlin Group, is that we wanted to create a reward for group participation. We wanted to bring the community together and reward the group depending on the level of participation. So that's where we kind of established these thresholds. So the first threshold is that once 12 libraries purchase that current front list from that specific press, the access to that back file will turn into perpetual rights. You will keep that content forever. That is yours regardless of further participation. And you will also get that gratis access to the archive, which is all content prior to 2000. Once 24 libraries purchase the front list, both the back file and archive will become perpetual rights. So you keep that in perpetuity, no ongoing update fees or any housing fees or anything like that. You own that content forever. So really it's an effort to, make this content more accessible to the Oberlin libraries, as well as, open the scope of content to increase usage, as well as making it a little easier for the libraries to eventually create a complete collection where they would basically have everything that has been produced from that press by purchasing the front list, getting the access to the back file and the archive, and then eventually filling in those gap years. So that is generally, what we're trying to do for the group. And we're really hoping that we can get the group excited and, get people talking to each other and hopefully, push some decisions that may help influence these thresholds. So my next slide, we can look at the current count of those thresholds. So as you can see in green on the left, Harvard and Columbia have already reached those thresholds. So everyone that's already been purchasing them has gained access to the archive pre-2000 and already has perpetual rights to the back file. And then anyone moving forward that purchases that will be granted those rights immediately. On the left, you'll see the ones in yellow. Those are the ones that we are anticipating, ideally by the end of the year, to reach those thresholds. And, if there's anything on there that you like, maybe you can, start getting some excitement amongst the community and we can start really driving some of these numbers. All right. Lastly, I did want to bring this up. Like we've talked about a lot today, couple keys for us are community and impact. And so within bringing the University Press community together, that's sort of how we created the University Press Library, by taking those challenges from, our press partners as well as our librarians. And we just think we can do more. We already contribute to our press partners the largest portion per dollar of any aggregator in the industry, but we still think there's more to be done. So that more that we came up with in 2022 was our not-for-profit arm of De Gruyter called eBound. We started out with a $50,000 commitment last year and have upped that commitment to $100,000 for this year, currently at $150,000 pool. Every UPL sale directly raises funds for this program, but none of those funds come out of our press partner contributions or affects our librarian's price. This is entirely from De Gruyter profit, and we will redistribute these funds to our partner presses to support publishing needs and projects that maybe don't have funding, such as open access or digitizing of collections. Really, the scope of those projects has not entirely been determined yet. We really want to aggregate these funds and then use our advisory board, which we've created of university librarians and press directors, to really determine where those funds are going to be utilized. We are excited to announce our first project, which is the digitization of George Carraz's book collection. He works for Gorgias Press, which is one of the presses that we have recently partnered with. And he is an avid collector of rare books. He has been collecting since he was a teenager, mostly in Syriac studies and studies throughout the Middle East. As we know, during current times, there have been a lot of conflict in the area. And unfortunately, a result of that, a lot of titles and libraries and book depositories have either been damaged or destroyed. So many of these titles are the last copy in circulation. So it is very imperative to, preserve this content and make sure it's available for future generations. So we just bought George a very expensive fancy scanner and sent it to his own personal collection because he did not want to move any of these books. There will be about a little over 2,000 books digitized, most of which are before the year 1800. And back to the accessibility point, we want to make this accessible. So once this project has finished and all the books have been digitized, this collection will be 100% open access on the De Gruyter platform. So like I said, with these projects, we really want to, provide additional funding for maybe some of these kind of niche or underfunded projects that are of vast importance, but may not be top priority for some of our press partners. So that is pretty much all we have for you today. You can see on the map here the breakdown of the Oberlin territories. Again, I take care of the Northeast and Southwest. My counterpart, Elizabeth, takes care of everything in between. so we can, you can find yourself on the map and figure out who your rep will be. But let's open up the floor for any questions, discussions, any other concerns about the model.
This is Kevin at Grinnell. I do have a question for the Gruyter folks. What are you seeing in terms of, and I realize as more schools jump in and buy things, you get gratis access to the back files. But what are you seeing for schools purchasing those years between 2013 and the present? So 2014-20, in terms of the Oberlin schools, how many are deciding roughly to actually fill in that hole between that and the front files? And then also just going forward and buying the archives without waiting potentially for these institutions to get to 24 subscribers?
So yeah, on a whole, I would say as most of the participants are fairly new within the last year or two, most of those new participants have not quite started filling in a lot of those gaps. We haven't seen any archive purchases yet, but I think from the general consensus is that they're more waiting on the group participation for the archives and back files. But I do know that some of the larger or the schools who have been participating for longer have began filling in the gaps. I believe Aaron is one of those, but I believe Dave could probably speak on that further as well.
Yeah, I think just to build upon what Derek had just mentioned, the libraries that are filling those or acquiring the content from 2014 through 2022, for example, and looking at the participants on this call, not to single any particular ones out, but just to help me put into perspective, I'd say about a quarter of them have certainly acquired some of those years in between. The archive collections, that's a really good question. We have had a few Oberlin institutions acquire those. None of those that are the Harvard or Columbia that are granted perpetual rights to those that are purchasing the front list from those presses, but it certainly isn't being purchased at the rate as, for example, ARLs are purchasing that. So perhaps that's an opportunity for us to perhaps look at the pricing of those collections, or maybe it's just a matter of this model being still relatively new.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Kevin.
Any other questions?
Looks like we got one from Teresa in the chat. It says, recently large numbers of Harvard UP and Columbia UP titles were removed from the ProQuest Academic Complete subscription collection. Is it your strategy going forward to stop working with aggregators and focus on having libraries purchase direct from De Gruyter? Will you continue to make new titles available through JSTOR? Does De Gruyter make those decisions, or are they the individual UPs? I think Steve or Dave could take this one.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if Steve is on the line here, but I could talk a little bit about this. So these are decisions that they're made by, there are two different ways of answering this here in terms of the presses and their participation in a certain platform. That's up to the press. We don't have any influence there, although of course these are our partners and we look at the numbers on our platform and we keep a very close eye on what other folks are doing and offer our opinion, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to JSTOR, I see here, Teresa, that you did not mention JSTOR EBA, but I just had something in mind. So if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to mention it. As far as I know, for JSTOR EBA, just for an example, that's they have an embargo, for a 3-year embargo for all of their press partners. So it's a bit of a policy for their platform for that particular model for all the presses that they work with. So it's a combination there of decisions that are made outside of what we do here at the Gruyter. But in terms of our strategy, what presses that we work with, we originally started looking at the Ivy League presses, so to speak, and the model through feedback from the community, kind of started gaining steam, and we got to a point where it was difficult, for example, to turn away a University of Chicago press or a Stanford University press. It's a very good fit beyond just Ivy League presses. And that's what's happened since then when it comes to those geographically significant presses that I mentioned earlier, Hawaii, Texas, just for example, and then now expanding to the UK with Edinburgh, Bristol, Manchester University Press. We need to be careful, though. We're certainly not we don't consider ourselves an aggregator, but rather a partner that provides these presses with individualized representation. The providing of presses on a per press basis and a per copyright year basis, as opposed to clumping them all together into some sort of aggregated package. I know that was a lot, but hopefully that answered your question.
Wonderful. Catherine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Catherine, you have one question here. That was, if the threshold isn't reached, does the backfile archive access last for 1 year and we lose it, or if we don't purchase the following year's front list?
Yeah, so when it is the gratis access, like it is with the original front list or with the archive once 12 are purchasing, yeah, that access technically is for 1 year with the respective front list purchase. And then if you continue purchasing that same press, that access will be restored. So it's something that typically most of our customers, once they opt in, while it is not a, yes, 1 year from purchase date. Correct. Yeah. Once you, and for the most part, we try not to take away this access. It would only be in this situation where you tell us that you would not like to renew. At that moment, then we would turn off the access 1 year from that original purchase date. But we do find that with most of our customers, they are not required to renew on an annual basis. Everything is technically a single perpetual purchase, but we have found that most of our customers do end up renewing the same content that they purchased in the previous year. So typically it is a multi-year plan, and we are also open to multi-year agreements as far as pricing goes.
Yeah, Catherine, just to add one more thing there. The University Press Library, because it is the acquisition of complete copyright year collections, and then with access to all this additional content, it's often seen as a strategic decision by the libraries that participate. Of course, there are libraries that might come on board 1 year because they have a year-end funding that they'd like to use to acquire this content. But for the most part, this is more than the purchase of just a one-time. It's a move in a certain direction based on an assessment of the benefits of the model, as well as current purchasing trends, et cetera. And because of that, we have seen a very positive rate of libraries purchasing a press 1 year and then purchasing the next copyright year edition, so to speak, or collection from the same university press.
Thank you. Any other questions in the chat, or if anyone would like to speak up? Okay. Well, just wanted to, on behalf of everyone here at Gruyter's, just really want to say thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to listen to us kind of rattle off. A special thanks to Aaron Sandoval, of course, for taking the time to also speak. Really appreciate the insight that you're able to provide, and to all of the other speakers as well today. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to your account manager, me, or Derek. We're always happy to hear from you. And I hope it was a very informative and impactful presentation for you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great day. Be safe in the snow.
Thank you.